Hi, I'm Jack Russell Weinstein for Adam Smith Works, talking about the first sentence of the theory of moral sentiments. When most people come to Adam Smith, they expect to read about selfish behavior and economics. But the theory of moral sentiments betrays all this. The first sentence, especially, sounds like it was written by someone completely different. It's not. It's Smith all the way. The sentence should be on your screen in front of you, but I'll read it anyway. How selfish soever man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others, and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. What this means is that we care about what happens to other people and get pleasure from their happiness. But that's just a summary. There's a lot more going on here. First of all, Smith was Newtonian. He was inspired by Isaac Newton's scientific method, so he began with natural principles, creating a system for human behavior analogous to what Newton did for objects in the heavens. And he built his theory from there. Lots of other people had similar methods. Anytime you see an 18th century book with the term treatise in the title, that means it's Newtonian. The first sentence is Smith's natural principle. He is starting from the claim that people matter to one another. And then he builds his theories of morality, economics, and politics from this standpoint. Yes, at times he does claim that people are self-interested, but self-interest isn't the same thing as being selfish. Selfishness involves caring only about yourself and ignoring what happens to others. Self-interestedness involves taking care of your own needs, sometimes first, but always out of necessity. Think about airplanes. How they tell you that if the oxygen masks are released, you are supposed to put the masks on yourself first, before you help anyone, even if you have kids with you. This is self-interest. You can't help anyone if you can't breathe, so you deal with yourself first and others second. But even so, Smith never claims that people are always and only focused on themselves. He just observes that appealing to their self-interest is a sure way to get them to go along with a commercial exchange. Now, there were philosophers who did think that people were purely selfish. Most importantly, Thomas Hobbes. He was the first modern political philosopher and the first person to really explain the social contract. That was in the year 1651. Not very modern by our standards, I know, but philosophers play the long game. Smith did not approve of Hobbes's theory, both because he thought it was too selfish and because it was relativistic. Good for Hobbes meant anything anyone desired, and Smith would have none of it. Smith also disapproved of Bernard Mandeville's work, one of Hobbes's followers who wrote about 50 years after him. Mandeville also argued that people were selfish, and he added that vice is what drove economic development. As he would say, private vices lead to public benefit. He points out that we wouldn't have locksmiths without thieves or police without criminals. A purely good society would be destitute. Smith was influenced by Mandeville's economics. The Wealth of Nations would take the idea of vice inspiring growth and run with it. But Smith didn't accept Mandeville's overall approach, and he did not share Mandeville's lack of faith in people. This is why the first sentence starts out the way it does. Howsoever selfish man may be supposed. That's Smith calling Hobbes and Mandeville out. It's his way of saying, you suppose people are selfish, you are just assuming it, even though there is evidence to show that you're wrong. You can see this in the next clause. There are evidently some principles in his nature. There's Newton again. But now Smith has added evidence to the equation. Where does that lead us? Nature. Human nature. The motivation that all people share as human beings. Smith uses Newton to undermine Hobbes and Mandeville, and only then does he make his own claim about appreciating the happiness of others. So we're back to where we started, but notice two things. The first is that for Smith, we detect happiness by seeing it. He's an empiricist, meaning that all of our knowledge comes to us through our senses. We have to determine whether or not people are happy by watching them. Of course, being told that someone is happy counts as using our senses. We're listening to them speak. But we still have to verify it for ourselves. This is the central question of the book. How can we determine people's emotions? How can we deduce their sentiments from just observing them? Smith's answer is that the ability is hardwired into us. He calls it sympathy, but today we would call it empathy. But developing our capacity to sympathize takes all of our attention, a well-crafted imagination, and frankly, a lifetime of effort to become really good at it. It takes him 342 pages in the Liberty Classics edition of the Theory of Moral Sentiments to go through it all, so I'm really not going to summarize the rest here. Notice also that Smith claims that we derive nothing but pleasure from other people's happiness. This is why he doesn't think we're selfish. We get nothing out of seeing people feel good. Oh, but many of you might argue, if we get pleasure out of it, aren't we getting something? Aren't we still being selfish? My students love to make this argument, but the fact is it's backwards. If we were truly selfish, we wouldn't get pleasure from seeing other people's happiness. We wouldn't necessarily be angry. We don't have to be jealous to be selfish. Most likely, we wouldn't get anything at all because other people's emotions would be irrelevant to us. The author Elie Wiesel famously remarked that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. This is what he means. When you are truly selfish, you just don't care about anyone else one way or the other. We can only derive pleasure from other people's happiness because we care about them. Their necessity to us is prior to our pleasure, not the other way around. Smith never makes this argument explicit in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, but it is implicit. Human beings need one another, and because of that, we want them to be happy. If you can't accept this from Smith, all the rest of his writing is just not going to make very much sense.